Have you ever wanted to heal your gut for good, but cost was prohibitive from finding your healing solution? If so, I have the perfect offer for you today. As part of celebrating hitting 200,000 downloads on the Better Belly podcast, we are giving away one full ride scholarship to the Better Belly Blueprint, my proven process to help you heal your gut completely, even when nothing else has worked. If you're saying, this sounds amazing, how do I enter? Winning is simple. It only takes 4 steps. Step 1, leave a rating and review for this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify between now and March 20th, 2025. Step 2, take a screenshot of that rating and review. Step 3, go to betterbellytherapies.com/giveaway and fill out our 200K giveaway form with your name, email, and screenshot of your podcast review. And step 4, you're going to automatically receive an email with a free gift as a thank you for joining, and of course be entered to win the full scholarship to the Better Belly Blueprint. The full scholarship winner will be announced on May 21st and messaged by email. If you win, you'll immediately get a full scholarship to the Better Belly Blueprint plus 3 months of free group coaching, which is a total value of $900. If you join the Better Belly Blueprint between now and May 21st and are the winner of the scholarship, you'll receive a full refund for the Better Belly Blueprint and any payments you made for 3 months of group coaching. So go to betterbellytherapies.com/giveaway and join the giveaway today. Do you struggle with feeling like you're stuck in chronic fight or flight? Do you have chronic health issues and you've heard that your gut health and overall health may be linked to your nervous system dysregulation, but you don't know where to start or what will actually work to heal your nervous system? Or do you worry that trauma may be behind your chronic illness or chronic health issues, but despite trying dozens of mind-body therapies or exercises, you feel like you've made little to no progress in healing your nervous system? If you said yes to any of these questions, then this episode is for you. On today's episode, we're exploring the popular topic of the brain-gut axis and why trying to support your brain-gut axis hasn't created the change or healing that you've been looking for. And maybe even the seeking out of trying to heal your nervous system has added some stress or confusion to your health journey. Not only this, and for today's episode, but for the next 3 episodes, we will be exploring new ways you can support your gut-brain connection and mind-body connection through interviews with 3 guest experts who specialize in the mind-body connection from the perspective of psychology and how you can actually regulate your nervous system in a way that's really totally different from what's being shared in pop culture and pop science right now. We'll be tackling everything from things like, is the vagus nerve really behind your mind-body connection dysregulation? Why your vagus nerve activation techniques aren't really getting to the root cause of your nervous system dysregulation, your real nervous system anatomy, hint, there's 3 components, why having a perfectly regulated nervous system isn't the actual goal in healing your mind-body connection, and you don't even need a perfectly regulated nervous system to have a healthy body, and how to regulate your nervous system out of fight and flight when nothing else has worked. If you've been struggling with bloating, constipation, IBS, leaky gut, or chronic illness, and feel that your brain or nervous system may be driving your chronic health issues, then be sure to catch every episode here on the Better Belly podcast this March, because today we are beginning the first episode in our Brain Gut series. Hey friend, welcome to the Better Belly podcast. If you're currently trying endless supplements, doctor visits, and diet changes to heal your mystery symptoms, you are in the right place. We're here to solve the real root causes behind your gut, hormone, skin, sleep, and brain concerns, literally anything and everything in your body. My name is Alison Jordan. I'm a functional medicine practitioner that has supported over 150 clients just like you to heal problems that no one has been able to fix. You don't need a perfect diet or a random supplement you found on Instagram to heal. You need a proven system that heals your whole body from the inside out. That's what I'm here to share with you, episode by episode. It's time to make health easy again. And just as a reminder, this information is not meant to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your own health practitioner before you make any changes to your health. All right, guys. So to start off today's podcast episode, I wanted to talk about why are we even going through this topic? Why this topic? Why now? So my inspiration for doing this, what really comes back to the fact that commonly when people join my program, the Better Belly Blueprint, which is a course that I've created that has a proven process that I've used with over 600 clients to heal your body from the inside out, gut, skin, sinuses, etc., from everything that is going to potentially be a root cause to these issues, whether that's parasites, mold, H. pylori, low stomach acid, nutrient deficiency, heavy metals. It's all in the course and teaches you the exact order you need to do to heal. I've worked with over 600 clients and put my entire method into this course. And between the students who are in that course and the 600 successful clients I've worked with over the past 7 years, I constantly am hearing my clients talk about this big pop culture, pop science topic of the gut-brain axis, vagus nerve regulation, the mind-body connection. And I've usually kept away from the topic because my goal and how I'm operating as a health practitioner is I'm not trying to be a psychologist. However, it has come to my attention that there is a lot of misinformation and honestly just poor discussion around what the gut-brain axis is, what our mind-body connection is, and how to regulate the nervous system. And this misinformation has resulted in a lot of anxiety and stress for my clients, which is the opposite of both what they want. They want to feel more calm and regulated, but also it's the opposite of what people are claiming is the goal when they talk about, let's heal your nervous system, let's regulate your gut-brain axis so that you can have fewer symptoms, so that you can really heal. And so if the way that we're talking about this mysterious, beautiful thing called our nervous system, if the way that we're talking about it is actually adding stress, adding confusion, there's something missing. Something's not being talked about it well. And so I have taken the time to really identify what is off, what is missing in this conversation, and what can we do to both be more accurate about how the nervous system works, how it's what three components is it made up of. Hint, most people only think of one of these three components, and I'm not about to talk about the dorsal vagal and ventral vagal. Like, we're not talking about the vagus nerve. It's so much more. And I want the goal that I have for this series is that you can walk away feeling more grounded and more centered and more peaceful about maybe even your current nervous system state, let alone how you might try to approach continuing to heal it or grow it or expand it in the future. So we're going to start with today's episode as a kind of framework, guiding, grounding, just getting everyone up to date on how to think about the nervous system. And then for the next 3 episodes, I'm actually having 3 different guest experts who are friends and colleagues of mine that I've either worked with directly or I've seen their work, and they have specialized in or incorporated specializing in to their practice and the way they work with people, the actual psychology behind the mind-body connection. So 2 of them are PhDs, they're doctors, they're psychologists, and then one of them is a health coach who's really dived deep into something called neuro-linguistic programming. But guys, don't just shut off. If you've ever heard of neuro-linguistic programming, or if you've ever tried to talk to psychologists about the brain-gut connection or the mind-body connection or healing your nervous system, they are going to bring a new, fresh way to have this conversation, and I'm so excited. So before we dive in further into this episode, the last thing I wanted to address is what my personal authority is on this topic, because I am not a psychologist. And so you're like, so Alison, why are you even going to have your own episode on the mind-body connection if you don't specialize in the mind? Well, here is why. And it has to do with the fact that the nervous system is broken up into 3 different parts. And this is not something that's talked about in textbooks, so I'm not referring to some textbook authority, but this is something that is in textbooks repeatedly, just never put together. And it has to, so my expertise is actually in 2 of the 3 areas. And the 3 experts I'm bringing in is in the one area that I'm not an expert in. So this is what the whole episode for today is going to be on. But just as a quick overview of what the 3 components of the nervous system are, one is psychological. So psychological is commonly where people are starting or thinking about when they think about the mind-body connection or the gut-brain connection. There is some awareness that the body can impact the mind, but many times what I'm seeing in Instagram or TikTok or blog posts or even books that are focusing on the nervous system component of regulation is it's really focused on the mind, the psychology. And this could have to do with traumas you've been through, whether that's like a big T trauma. Big T trauma is what I like to refer to as an event. That could be a near-death experience. That could be loss of a loved one. That could be childhood type traumas. That might be verbal abuses, physical abuses, sexual abuses. So there are usually, or PTSD related to going to war, things like that. Those are events, and those are big T traumas, where you're able to say there was something that happened, and it would before and after is a totally different me. And then you have little T traumas. Little T traumas are often, you could fit more into the CPTSD diagnosis, complex trauma, where it's usually smaller, stressful things that are happening, but frequently happening. So chronic low-grade stresses over time. And some of these traumas could be traumas of omission, not where something bad happened to you, but something good that is part of a normal nurture sequence for a healthy growing human being didn't happen. So maybe your parents never hit you, but you didn't receive hugs from them, or touch frequently enough to the point that we know that humans need healthy, nurturing touch to develop normally, right? So those are usually considered little T traumas. It doesn't mean that they're lesser. It just means that they're not singular events. They are cumulative and they happen over time. So really a psychological component of nervous system regulation has to do with your psychological response to real or perceived threats. It has to do with what's going on in certain areas of your brain, like your limbic system, your amygdala. It can have to do with conscious thoughts you're having. That might be conscious self-hatred, conscious fears that you have, and it can be unconscious things that you are feeling, but that usually result in either emotional states that are uncomfortable and stressful, or simply brain reactivity that is stressful to the body and can result in adrenal gland activation or other things that are more physical for you. So that's the first one. That's the first one that I find people talk a lot about, and it's so relevant. It's not unrelevant to the conversation on the mind-body connection. And if you kind of have physical symptoms, whether that's migraines or bloating or constipation or acid reflux or autoimmune issues like Crohn's disease or hypothyroidism, it doesn't mean that the psychology component's irrelevant because of the fact that there's 2 more layers to the nervous system that I'm about to bring up, but it's the one that I find people talk about the most. And if you're not aware that there are 2 other components to the nervous system, then if you really hammer away at this one component of psychological well-being, then you might not get the results you want, because some of the issues in your nervous system regulation might not be centered in your psychological, mental health. All right. So the nervous system has two more parts, and the next two parts are the ones that I actually specialize in. And I talk about a lot on the podcast, usually just not using the language of gut-brain axis, mind-body connection, nervous system regulation, and they are inherently built into my process that I work with clients in, and especially into my proven process, the Better Belly Blueprint. So the next two components of nervous system regulation are, number one, what I call anatomical nervous system. Your anatomical nervous system is your physical corporeal being. That is your nervous system, like your actual brain, not your brain, the thoughts happening inside your brain tissue, your spinal cord, like tissue, a physical touchable tissue. Your vagus nerve is a tissue. So this is anatomical. And then the third one is cellular. Cellular is what I consider to be the most mysterious. There's honestly not a great word for this third component. I thought about lots of different words to put here, and I felt that cellular just did the best job, but it's not perfect. I'm going to explain a little bit once we start breaking up these three sections more in depth why I chose the word cellular, but it has to do with your fascia. It has to do with the fact that your cells remember trauma. Your cells remember emotions. I'm going to get a little bit into, just a teeny bit into the science behind that and give you guys further resources if you want to dive deeper into like cells remember trauma. Yes, your cells, not just your brain, not just your cells in your brain, not just your brain nervous tissue, but your liver cells can remember trauma. Your muscle cells can remember traumatic experiences and the emotions behind them. And when that happens, those cells can become less functional because they are usually, and there's a mechanism for it, but right now I'll just call it, the cells are burdened down by those quote unquote memories. And we're going to talk about the mechanism of the memory. So those last two components of the nervous system, the anatomical, that's where I started in my work with healing people. I started as a massage therapist, but I specialized in anatomy. I was a medical massage therapist, and so I didn't just rub people just to make them psychologically less stressed, which, yeah, getting a Swedish massage can reduce your sense of psychological stress. But another thing that can really help your sense of psychological stress or your nervous system regulation is, let's say you have compression on your brain from your occipital bone, which is the base of the skull, because of some whiplash you experienced 5 years ago in a rear-end car accident that you thought wasn't that severe, but you didn't realize, and nobody else has realized. Your chiropractor hasn't realized it, your physical therapist hasn't realized it, your doctor hasn't realized it. There's still some ongoing compression happening in the occiput bone, and it's pressing into the occipital region of the brain. If that's happening, it's going to reduce blood flow in that area, which is going to reduce functionality of that area. It can also create a lot of hypersensitivity. If there's compression into the occipital region, that can also create compression that goes all the way to the midbrain. And there's a lot of things going on in the midbrain related to, for example, there is your reticular activating system, RAS. The reticular activating system is inside of the midbrain, the pons, the medulla, right? If that area is being compressed, there's less blood flow, or there's activation because of the compression, you're going to be in a chronic fight and flight. Interestingly enough, your vagus nerve literally comes out of your reticular activating system, the RAS, in the midbrain. And so if you are thinking about your vagus nerve and like, I'm trying to do all these vagus nerve stimulating exercises like yawning or drinking water, all these things that are like you're using like literally a device to try and activate your vagus nerve, it could just be compression from your occiput. But that is the level of anatomy that I started working with as a craniosacral therapist. And then later, even more so, as learning visceral manipulation. And these are two modalities. If you've never heard them, welcome. They're amazing. I have Lots of content on it. I'd say my number one episode that I like to start people with, if you've never heard of these modalities, is episode 90 of the Better Belly podcast, and I put it in the show notes. It's called Fascia 101, the hidden force behind bloating and constipation. And fascia, it's part and parcel of the anatomical compressions that can happen across the body. So that being said, I would start with that episode if you've never heard of craniosacral therapy or visceral manipulation. Similarly, if you want to know somebody who does craniosacral therapy or visceral manipulation in your area, you can go to a tool that I created called at betterbellytherapies.com/find, and you can actually learn how to find someone in your area through a directory, and you can learn even how to evaluate what their qualifications are, who's the most likely person who's going to have the highest level of training that you could see in your area. So if you want to find someone who's local to you who does that, go to betterbellytherapies.com/find. So that's the anatomical, and that's where I personally started, was just learning where are all the physical tissues coming and going in the body, and how are they talking to each other, and then how do those tissues become dysfunctional through injury that many people aren't even aware happened to them. So a lot of times it's not injury like someone comes to me and they know that they had a traumatic car accident. It's people just say, I don't know why, I can't sleep, or I'm constantly anxious, or I get headaches, and all these things can be linked to anatomical compression and dysfunction, adhesions around the nervous system, the physical existence of the nervous system. The second one, cellular, I ended up getting into several years after being a medical massage therapist and doing craniosacral therapy and visceral manipulation, and that is the cellular component of the mind-body connection or nervous system regulation. And I ended up working with this tissue or this this component of nervous system health without being as aware of it. When I was learning anatomy, I was very aware, like, this is the anatomy of the nervous system tissue. This one was much more, and still is much more, nebulous and vague, but it has to do again with the facts that cells decrease in their functionality when traumas happen to them. And if you can increase the functionality of cells, sometimes you can release emotions that are stored in those cells, and vice versa. If you can release emotions in those cells through something like somato-emotional releases, SERs, which is a part of craniosacral therapy, or manual therapy. Like literally, I've had people cry on my table when I would do, most often it's going to be techniques around the hips, but in the chest, in the throat. I'm not trying to make them cry or do some emotional release where I'm following tissue tension, and as I'm releasing the tissue, it's releasing the emotions stored in that tissue, and then they're having emotional releases. And then later, it's not just the emotional release that's the benefit, it's that tissue starts to function better because the tissue becomes disabled and functioning when there is a lot of they're peptides that basically clog up the cell membrane from being able to get information and nutrients into the cell walls because of these neurotransmitter peptides that are attached to the cells. So that's like, you do not expect that level of science to be coming at you just now. But another thing that this cellular component of your nervous system can also be seen in somatic therapies. So when you see people who say they're somatic therapy specialists, so they might be a therapist, but they might teach you how to move in such a way to try and release trauma or nervous system dysregulation of some sort in the body. It has to do with the fact that they're stimulating tissue, but they're not stimulating specifically nervous system tissue inherently. And that's the difference. When I say anatomical nervous system, I'm not referring to the whole body. I'm only referring to nervous system tissue, nerves, brain, spinal cord, etc. The rest of the body, like your muscles, have nerves going to it, but your muscles are not nerves. Your liver is not a nerve. It is liver cells. It's an organ, right? But you can have emotions stored in there. So Those two areas are where I specialize, and we're going to talk a little bit more about them today. And then for the next 3 episodes, we're really going to dive into the psychological component. But that is the most important thing I wanted you to understand from this first episode in our gut-brain axis series for March, is simply that the nervous system is broken up into these 3 parts. And it's the failure to acknowledge these 3 parts and the failure to acknowledge these 3 parts in a gentle, curious, non-demanding way that is causing actually more dysregulation, as many of us are seeking to heal our dysregulated nervous system. All right, so I hope that we took kind of a complex, sometimes nebulous, mysterious, beautiful concept and broke it down into something more concrete. I hope that was concrete for y'all. But let's actually dive a little bit deeper. If that wasn't deep enough for you, or if that didn't feel deep enough, let's talk about this more. So the nervous system, we're going to go back to the first component of the nervous system. It's broken up into 3 parts, and the first one was psychological. And our 3 guests that are going to come on for the next 3 weeks, that's what they're going to talk about the most. But the big thing that I want to prepare you guys for, if you're like, do I even want to listen to these episodes that are going to be coming up? I find that a lot of my clients are very skeptical of people talking about this because they already feel that they've heard. Well, I already kind of have heard about, yeah, I need to heal my trauma, and so I should see a counselor, or I should do trauma releasing therapies like EMDR, which can be super powerful. And EMDR actually bridges the psychological brain by being able to access deeper subconscious levels of the brain, like the psychological component of it, by actually engaging with more of the nervous system or physical component of your body and brain. So very interesting therapy there to even mention. But if you have, what I want you to know for the next 3 episodes is that one thing that me and all my guests have agreed on, who I've invited, is that there is this myth out there that is driving a lot of dysregulation in nervous systems. And the myth is that if you have a perfectly balanced nervous system, your health will improve, or that you must have a perfectly balanced and regulated nervous system to have or achieve the good health you're trying to get. And that is a lie. It's a lie on 2 parts. Number 1 part is that 2 of my guests out of the 3 have done amazing, extensive work on their own nervous system health and their relationship with their nervous system, and they feel very at peace with their nervous system. And yet those 2 people also have a lot of chronic health issues that they are actually openly talk about. And so it can prove that you could, like, we don't want to be like, well, do they really have regulated nervous systems? Yes, they could. And so I have clients who come in and they think, well, I really think it's my nervous system. It might be. And I really like to encourage people to, I never tell someone that it's not true, because I really like to encourage, and I really believe that many people, we have intuitive, innate senses in what we need that are accurate on how to heal. But we can also get kind of distracted or start to believe different things about where our sicknesses are truly coming from simply having pressures and perfectionism and saying, well, I was dysregulated this morning when I took my kids to school, and that's why I have a headache, or that's just proof that I haven't healed my nervous system enough, and that's why I still have all these chronic health issues. That is not true. And what we're going to discuss with these 3 experts is the fact that it's not about having a perfectly regulated nervous system at all points in time, but it's about being at peace with where your nervous system is as it fluctuates, as it becomes dysregulated, as it becomes re-regulated, as we flow. Dr. Julia is going to talk about flow and being at peace and accepting. She doesn't use these words herself. She used cooler words than these, but for me, when I hear her talk, I I hear the words being at peace and being accepting where the nervous system's at. And that takes training. It takes practice, and not like really tough, hard practice, but simply an awareness of that's the type of flow you want to be in, and saying, you know what, I am super dysregulated right now. I am really mad at my kids. I did just yell at them. My brain is spiraling. I am anxious right now, whatever it is going on. But that we're not adding on an additional layer of like, and I'm anxious about being anxious, or I'm putting all this pressure on myself to stop being so dysregulated because it's messing me up or it's messing my kids up, etc. So Dr. Julia, who's going to be in 2 episodes, is going to talk about that. We also are going to be talking about how when we've been sick for a really long time, and really long might not be, it could be 2 weeks. Like you might be here, and sometimes I get people who say, I've had this issue for 2 weeks and I want to deal with it and for it to be gone. That might be long enough for you. But most of our clients on average who are listening to this podcast, who end up joining and working with us, they've been sick for 10 years. They've been actively trying to heal for a minimum of 10 years. And first off, it's always super sad to us, but it is also something we're aware of, that many people join this conversation on trying to heal from the perspective of having been in it for a long time. And so we're having Dr. Kelly Ruda come in, who's a psychologist, and she's going to be talking about, she and I are going to be having a conversation on what are some of the mindsets and subconscious beliefs we start to pick up and live with and live out that are making it much harder for us to, again, be at peace and come to that regulation of nervous system. And a lot of times it's not about fixing something. I promise you, no, we're not talking about boxed breathing. We're not talking about Buteyko breathing. We're not talking about breathing at all. We are going to talk about being gentle and kind with ourselves, but from brain-based, science-based backgrounds. So that is everything about the psychological brain that I'm going to share on this episode, because it is not my area of expertise, but I know enough because I've worked on healing my own psychological brain. I've done things like internal family systems, which is a really, really cool therapy where instead of it being typical talk therapy, like you're telling a therapist your own conscious thoughts, the therapist is actually working with you to help you actually discover internal parts of yourself that are needy. And internal family systems, they have different parts of it. You have things like the protector, you have, and I actually don't remember all of them off the top of my head right now because it's not my area of expertise. I haven't done it in a long time. But you have different parts of your quote unquote family that are different parts of you, and they could be child parts of you, they could be adult parts of you, they could be parts of you you've segmented off as kind of other people in your life, and they play roles in this internal drama of your psyche and your mind and your spirit. And internal family systems, when you're going through this therapy, IFS, you're helping discover what those things are. And sometimes your body ends up becoming a part of that. So I've done a lot of internal family systems work. I've done it in conjunction with craniosacral therapy, and that's been super helpful. So we're just going to say the psychological part is we're saving for the next 3 episodes. So another reason why regulating your gut-brain axis has potentially not worked, and I've already dove into this a little bit, is because of the anatomical component. And I find that it's always a little interesting to me. People can have seen chiropractors for many years or gotten myofascial release for many years, or, worked with breathing exercises or done yoga or done hip openers or whatever. And if you have not worked with somebody yet who truly can feel anatomical pulling and fascial dysfunction around nervous system tissue, then you could be doing all these exercises and all these therapies to try and heal, and the nervous system tissue is still going to be dysfunctional. And the two therapies that I've found have yielded the most number of practitioners who know how to work with this is craniosacral therapy and visceral manipulation. So I already gave the example of giving, if you have compression on the occipital bone from mild whiplash that you never needed a neck brace for, or you never got physical therapy for because you didn't even know your whiplash was that severe, but you come into my office and I do a physical evaluation and you tell me your symptoms are anxiety and bloating and poor sleep, and then I, in my evaluation, discover that your occipital bone and your C1 and C2 of your vertebra are compressed together, and that there's reduced blood flow behind the occipital bone to the brain region. Then when I release that brain region and the reticular activating system gets increased blood flow, there's increased cerebral spinal fluid going around the brain and into the spinal cord, and that whole system starts to regulate and not be under literal pressure. You leave and you sleep better that night, and not just that night, but the next night and the night after that and the night after that. And for inexplicable reasons, you wake up and you feel less anxious. Nothing's different about your life. Your kids are still the same age. Your work still has the same pressures. Your spouse and you are still going through the same, trials, or you have still the same financial situation you had before that appointment, but now you simply feel calmer about it. And that is the beauty of working with the anatomical nervous system. And it's not something you can know you have. All the time I have clients come in and they say, I've done all these therapies and I've worked on this and I don't think this is the issue. Or I really think it's, I have gut issues and I really think my microbiome is out of balance. And we find out that they have restrictions through the thoracic junction. So thoracic is anywhere in your chest, so rib cage. That is actually causing compression on the vagus nerve, because the vagus nerve follows the esophagus down right behind the heart and between the lungs, as it then enters into the gut. So you think that it's the vagus nerve in the gut that's causing the issue, but it's actually the vagus nerve getting compressed in the thoracic region. And again, you may or may not have a physical trauma linked to that. I do get into more examples of physical traumas in episode 90 that can cause this. Everything from being pregnant, doesn't even have to be a traumatic pregnancy or traumatic delivery, just being pregnant puts a lot of pressure up into the rib cage. You could have rib cage stuff going on because of how you were born. So this could be more of a early life example of torsions and compressions. But I've had so many times that I work with people in their chest region, and we really can feel that the esophagus is adhesed, which sets you up for acid reflux. The vagus nerve is getting compressed, which sets you up for even more GI issues, as well as nervous system issues. And then you're also getting compression or more difficulty around the lungs breathing easily. And breathing is something we need to do to feel calm. If your body doesn't feel like it can breathe easily, it automatically elevates your sense of your body's little physical anxiety response. Because imagine if you're underwater and you can't breathe, the whole body goes into panic mode. This is not like you're not responding to fear of some friend of yours having to see an ex-boyfriend or something at a conference. You're responding to a life and death issue that's on a physical level, but you are getting a nervous system response. And so I get clients who they don't even realize that breathing has become difficult for them because of adhesions in the thorax or in the abdomen that have made it difficult for their lungs to expand. We release that, and then that can help them. And that gets into the cellular component. So the cellular, I wanted to give you guys some extra resources on cellular component to your nervous system. I already mentioned that your cells have memory, and you were like, that came out of nowhere, potentially. It's not woo-woo. I mean, it kind of is because not a lot of people acknowledge it. But there's actually a book called Molecules of Emotion by Dr. Candace Pert. She's a doctor. She did research on this. And I have a link in the show notes if you want to go buy it from Amazon, read it. Molecules of Emotion. It's not an easy read. It's not designed for the layperson. So just a heads up, it's not easy. It's very sciencey. But the summary of it is that she did all this research on, can we find signs of emotions in the rest of the body that's not nervous tissue? Because most of the time we think of emotions being in the limbic system. Emotions are in the amygdala, they're in the brain somewhere. There's neurotransmitters, right? And they're creating emotions. And she thought, well, can I see signs of emotions elsewhere in the body? Because we've observed over time that we can experience emotions elsewhere in our body. We have butterflies in our stomach. We can feel tense. Our whole musculature can be tense because of how we're feeling about a situation. And so she did all these little slices on people who'd passed. So took some cadavers and took different really super tiny biopsies of different parts of their body and found that most frequently in areas that had high blood flow, so liver has high blood flow, heart has high blood flow, muscles have high blood flow, the higher the blood flow there is, the more likely it was that she would find little protein peptides, which is a broken down component of a protein strand, a peptide, little peptides that are actually broken up pieces from former whole neurotransmitters. So things that used to be serotonin, things that used to be dopamine, things that used to be norepinephrine are now broken up, and then they attach themselves to these cells on the liver, on muscle tissue, on inside the heart. And those cells function less well. Why? A cell has a cell wall membrane, and the membrane is both the house to the cell and also the door. So it houses the cell, it keeps all the innards of the cell, the little organelles of the cell from floating away. It distinguishes one cell from another cell. And it also is designed to let things in and out. And it lets things in and out by basically having these, I don't know, I always think of them as like launching pads or like a spaceship docking center, right? It needs to dock the cell. Well, if the docks for a cell are mostly or completely taken up by other things that are not what the cell needs. So glucose might need to dock the cell. Thyroid hormone needs to dock the cell to be able to deposit its goods or get inside and do its job. If all of those docks are taken up by protein peptides that have to do with emotions that you've experienced that overflow from the brain, end up in the bloodstream, and then get caught up somewhere in a region with high blood flow, then that cell becomes less functional. And she found that especially with people who had, sometimes it might be liver cancer or elevated liver enzymes. Like she could look at the health history of this person documented before they passed, and she could correlate very frequently that if they had an illness, this wasn't always, it wasn't causative, it wasn't, they had a bunch of emotions stuck in their stomach and that's why they had ulcers, but it was very common that if she could look at their health history, she would know that if I went and biopsied that area, there's a higher likelihood that those cells would have these protein peptides on them. So the question then becomes, how do you get the protein peptides off? Because if we can get them off of those cells, we can return functionality to the cells. And it really looks like you can do it in two ways. One is manual therapy, where you're actually touching that region. And I've had, this has actually happened to me. I shared about it in a recent episode, my colonics episode. This is going to be episode, literally the episode right before this one, 253. And I shared about when I got my first colonics or colon hydrotherapy session, I didn't have any constipation issues. I didn't have any gut health issues. I was just doing it to see kind of what it was like and would I experience any benefits afterwards from getting it done. And I ended up having this somato-emotional release, meaning my body was being stimulated. Soma is Latin for body. And then emotional, then I was having an emotional response. So I started like crying in front of my colonics therapist, and I wasn't having memories. I wasn't having any specific memory. I wasn't having any specific anything. I just was suddenly overwhelmed with this very, very strong like sadness, grief, and it felt good as it got out, kind of like it was stuck in there and I didn't even know it was in there. And then I felt better, right? So to me, some of that is going to be emotional healing, just like letting some of that process, and the fact that I had been constipated for so many years and gone through so much pain related to that and felt all the feels of that chronic illness and chronic issue that I'd had. So you can get physical stimulation that can help with that. And then you can also, vice versa, sometimes get similar things where an area of your body, say low back pain, and I mention low back pain because there's a great book by Dr. John Sarno, who's kind of like, he's a doctor. He wasn't a back specialist inherently, but he ended up noticing he had a lot of clients, patients who were dealing with back pain, and they would go and get back surgeries. They would get, x-rays. They would get all these different scans, and doctors would say, oh, it's your herniated disc, or you need a surgery, or whatever it is. There's a bulging disc, and they would get these surgeries and the pain would not go away. And he said, well, if it really was an anatomical issue, we fixed it with the surgery. Why is the pain not gone away? And he ended up finding that it was actually the body trying to protect its owner from some issue. So maybe the issue was the person hated their job, and so their back would act up, and then the person had to call in and say, I can't come to work today because my back hurts. Now, their back genuinely hurts. They are not lying. This is not placebo effect. This is not calling in sick when you're not actually sick. This is the body manifesting a very true, real symptom. Because the other thing that's really interesting that Dr. John Sarno gets into is that the back, or rather, there's a lot of research done where they will grab just a swath of random people in a population and do an x-ray, and they find literally people with herniated and bulging discs who have zero pain. There's zero issue with that person. And they can have a herniated or bulging disc the same as somebody who's in severe pain. So there's actually been research that shows essentially that it's possible that the herniated or bulging disc isn't even the source of the issue, which is just mind-blowing. It's a phenomenal book. I've also linked it in the show notes. I do find it's an easier read than Molecules of Emotion. It's a different type of read, so they really are different books. But if you're looking for a disclaimer, healing back pain is great. And what's interesting is that he actually talks in the book that when he was writing it, which I think was in the 90s, I didn't double check this. When he was writing it, he said prior to back pain, the big thing that doctors were seeing in large swaths of the population for inexplicable reasons was stomach ulcers. Well, stomach ulcers were essentially started to fade away once we developed PPIs. And we thought, oh, it's because we have proton pump inhibitors, and so now we have fixed the issue with ulcers. Well, he really believes that there's probably some component of placebo effect where the person says, well, I can take a PPI, so my body symptom isn't going to manifest as an ulcer, but it's going to manifest as a different symptom. So what's interesting is that even if you don't have back pain, the book is still super relevant to you, because he ends up talking about it might not be back pain that's your symptom. It could be migraines. It could be chronic fatigue. It could be whatever. That could be your body trying to protect you. And it's actually very similar to internal family systems in this way, where you have protectors who are trying to protect a victim or essentially like a needy person inside of this internal psychological state, and then you can manifest symptoms. So the internal family systems, one of your quote unquote players might actually be your migraine pain. It might actually be your chronic fatigue. And the crazy thing about this is I'm not saying if you have chronic fatigue or some chronic symptom that you automatically are having, it's like some type of nervous system protection. We can't know that. It's not inherently what's going on. It's one possibility. And it's very different. Like, box breathing is not going to fix your relationship to your migraine, or if there's anatomical compression creating anxiety, box breathing is not going to fix that, right? So we really need to have this more holistic view on the mind-body connection, the gut-brain axis, etc., that it's this bigger thing. So this cellular component also includes fascia, and suddenly, like, the cellular component of healing just gets even bigger. So we have neurotransmitters or peptides from neurotransmitters that can get stuck on cells. Now we're also talking about fascia, which, if you've never heard of it, is this large connective tissue throughout your body. Fascia experts believe that there's more fascia in your body, more of this connective tissue, than there is any other tissue in your body. So you have more fascia than bones, more fascia than your muscles, more fascia than skin. You have more fascia than any other system or tissue in your body. And from what I've researched and what I've learned, and even what I've observed with my own clients and being a manual therapist, I agree. This is where I stand. I think that it's the most abundant type of tissue in the body. And I, at one point in time, loved fascia so much that I considered making fascia my expertise, but I ultimately did not. So I am going to share with you 5 different people on Instagram. Admittedly on Instagram, but they're not all solely on Instagram. One person has a book, for example, that you can read, but I like being on Instagram. I like little small nuggets of information people share, and there are 5 people who I love who are my fascia experts on Instagram, and I'm going to link them in the show notes. But one is called @MT Performance DK. So DK stands for Denmark, MT is his first and middle name, and then Performance, MT Performance DK. The next one is @Fascial Care, FASCIAL Care, CARE. Then @Musical Breathwork, number 4, @Azra, AZRA.Bertrand, BERTRAND, and then @Alina Kanner, and Alina is ALEENAKANNER, and I have all these in the show notes. These people have phenomenal information on why fascia can be connected to your nervous system and your nervous system regulation, fight and flight, emotions, all these different things. Your emotions can impact your fascial system, meaning you're going to have fascial dysfunction, which is more on a physical plane, and then your fascial component, and then you can also have fascial damage, maybe more from having illnesses. So illness is one way that you can get fascial adhesions, like meningitis. If you've ever had meningitis or stomach flu, these illnesses can create adhesions, which is just a stickiness of the fascia so that area doesn't expand and stretch the way it should. You can also get it from accidents. That could be falling off your bike, falling out of a tree, falling off a horse, slipping on ice, car accidents, sports injuries and sports collisions. All those things can impact your fascia. And then from repeated injury or repeated use. That could be sitting too much, sitting in certain positions, being, again, like maybe you work on a farm and you do a motion repeatedly. All these things can cause dysfunction in the fascia. And if that fascia gets twisted and adheres, that can actually impact the nervous system. And these 5 people talk about that very regularly. It's not every post, but it's a really great way. So if you want to learn more on how to release your fascia, visceral manipulation is the one way that I like to work the most, or I see the most impact in my clients and myself, as well as craniosacral therapy, and you can go to episode 90 and learn about that. So this is my conclusion to the episode. There is no one way to work with and heal your nervous system. It's not box breathing. It's not thinking happy thoughts. It's not positivity. It's not declaration cards. It's not, just repeating stuff to yourself. There are gentler ways. And a lot of the ways right now that are being promoted to heal your nervous system can be very intense. Everything from cold plunges to talk therapy. Talk therapy can actually be very aggressive on our brains and not really the subtle, gentle healing that we need. But at the same time, these therapies exist. I'm really tearing down box breathing, including box breathing, because A, they worked for someone, B, they're tapping into real things that can be helpful. And so they get popularized to do these things every time you're anxious or dysregulated, but they might not actually get to the root cause of that dysregulation, meaning you're going to keep getting dysregulated by the same event over and over again if you don't get to the root, like, why are you reacting to your kids this way? Why every time do you have this symptom do you go into a full panic? You want to get to the root cause, because then that means you can experience those same stimuli and not have the same reaction. It keeps you a little calmer. The other thing is feeling upset about feeling upset. If you dysregulate and then you're dysregulated about being dysregulated, that's another big issue. That's kind of being popularized right now, of essentially expecting to have these perfectly regulated nervous systems, so we panic if we get dysregulated. Let's not do that. So there's no one way to work with and heal the nervous system. There's no such thing as a perfectly regulated nervous system. Chronic fight and flight can be as much of an issue on a physical level, meaning that compression into the occipital bone, pressing into the reticular activation system, as much as a cellular issue like toxins in your system, as much as a psychological issue. So big traumas, little traumas, mindset issues, limiting beliefs. I am personally much calmer and more regulated than 10 years ago when I started my healing process. And yes, that was 10 years. I got sick in 2015. It's now 2025. Kind of crazy to think that it's been 10 years since my life felt like it fell apart for a solid 2 years and nobody could fix anything. But when I look back on, like, how did I become more calm? How did I become more regulated? And I only say more regulated. I am not perfect. But all the ways that ended up helping my nervous system were nothing that from what I expected on how I'd already been. In 2015, I'd probably been in therapy for 6 years minimum. I started therapy in 6th grade. And in 2015, I just graduated from college. So that's way longer than 6 years. 8 years, 4 years for college, 4 years for high school, and then 2 additional years in middle school. So 10 years. I'd been in like DBT, CBT, talk therapies, worked with Christian therapists, done prayer, done all sorts of meditation and scripture memory. I'd done all sorts of things to try and help my brain heal myself. And the things that helped me the most were things I never expected: craniosacral therapy, visceral manipulation, living far enough from my family for long enough, getting into a really healing church environment, spiritual development, training my nervous system to simply just feel comfortable being at peace, which a really big help for me was reading the book The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. And he really dives deep into a concept called limiting beliefs, and realizing I had all these limiting beliefs around how happy I was allowed to be, or how peaceful I could be, on how regularly I could feel peaceful, and really learning to expand how peaceful I could feel and how regularly I could feel peaceful. Doing things like internal family systems. These were all therapies I'd never heard of as a kid. I never heard talked about, but they were, as I came across them, all I did was come to them with curiosity, not demanding they fix me, not panic, not aggression, but just, let's just see what this therapy can do. I'm super curious. And that kept me soft and open to self-discovery. And that self-discovery developed self-compassion. And that self-compassion has developed more resilience. And that ability to say, hey, this moment right now, things are not perfect. I am really upset. I did just yell at my daughter. I am experiencing a symptom that's very uncomfortable, but I can hold space for that. So I hope that this episode and the next 3 episodes in this series helps open your awareness to new ways you can interact with your body in a peaceful, compassionate way. You don't have to have a perfect nervous system to get wins from these episodes. You don't have to be regulated at all points in time. You can and will have a dysregulated nervous system many more times for the rest of your life, and you might not necessarily mean that you're going to have symptoms. You could still be very physically healthy, and you could also have a very regulated nervous system and still have symptoms. So this is just about being on a journey of healing and just saying, what body, what is the next thing that you want, that you feel safe and you want to expand and open yourself for? And I hope that these next 3 guests that we have help give you peace, give you that self-compassion, and just start to think a little differently about the nervous system than what pop culture, again, currently is doing to us with having a perfect nervous system and doing these 10 exercises before bed and when you wake up and all these things to try and calm yourself. It's actually not that complicated. We can have simple, healthy lives, and you can find things that give you joy and that feed you and are not chores for you to do, that are regulating and healing. So thank you for joining me on this episode. I cannot wait for you guys to hear the rest of this series. And until the next episode, I hope you guys have a great week.
Hey friend, I hope you loved this episode. If you've been a fan for a while or newly loving this podcast, can you do me a favor? Drop into Apple Podcasts and leave me a review. When you leave a review, you do so much. You help me know you're listening, you can tell me what you're loving so I know what to make more of, and you help others by boosting this podcast so other people like you can find the podcast too. I mean, it's a win-win-win, right? So if you want a way to pay it forward, just go to Apple Podcasts or click the link in my show notes and leave a rating and review. And if you want some more free stuff, just head over to my free Facebook group, betterbellytherapies.com/Facebook, and you can get access to all of my free support for you, including some Facebook group exclusive stuff like my podcast episode vault, where you can search the Better Belly podcast by topic and find exactly what you need to expedite your healing. I cannot wait to see you in there. Catch you guys next week.